West during the rest of today. Otherwise, it's going to be dry, and that's your weather for Sunday.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up on this morning on The Political Correction, we're talking about the government's Rwanda asylum plan after a last-minute intervention from the European Court of Human Rights grounded the inaugural flight this week. We're also talking about the We Demand Better march, which took place in London yesterday. That plus plenty more after your latest news with Bethany.
Thanks, Deanna. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The Transport Secretary is accusing the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union of punishing millions of innocent people over the 3-day strike next week. Grant Shapps says the union has ignored requests to negotiate a deal to stop the industrial action on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. The union claims rising inflation means its members, who've had a 3-year pay freeze, have now taken a 20% pay cut. Labour claim the government want the strikes to go ahead to stoke political divisions. And the RMT's former Assistant General Secretary, Steve Headley, told GB News he agrees with Labour.
They want a distraction from soaring fuel prices, from the cost of living crisis, and they want to take on the unions. It's a great distraction. It's red meat for the Tory voters. They rally the party faithful. So I think we do, and I think this strike's really avoidable. I think we should be still around the negotiating table, but rather than negotiate in good faith with the unions, Shapps seems more interested in the latest soundbite in the press.
The government's levelling up agenda is destined to fail if the Conservatives won't devolve power outside of Whitehall. That's a warning from the Labour leader. Sir Keir Starmer will make a speech to his party at a conference in Warwick today, where he'll accuse the Tories of hoarding power in London while squandering the potential of the rest of the country. He'll say a Labour government would work to help grow regional economies and rebalance power in the country. The new head of the British Army has warned its troops must prepare to fight in Europe as the war continues in Ukraine. General Sir Patrick Sanders wrote to his soldiers about the challenges they face after taking over from his predecessor last Monday. He said there's a burning imperative to forge an army capable of fighting alongside allies to defeat Russia. It comes after the Prime Minister returned from his trip to Ukraine's capital yesterday, saying we need to steel ourselves for a long war. A loan that provides emergency funds to the financially vulnerable is to be broadened out to 20,000 people. The no-interest loan scheme is backed by the government but run by credit unions and other lenders. It helps those who'd otherwise be turned down for not being able to afford interest payments to buy things like laptops, school uniforms and household essentials. The scheme is being trialled in Manchester and will be rolled out to other parts of the UK from September. Olympic champion Dame Kelly Holmes has shared her relief at coming out after decades of living in fear around her sexuality. In an interview with the Sunday Mirror, the 52-year-old says she's known since she was 17 when she was in the Women's Royal Army Corps, but she's kept it a secret out of fear of repercussions. The two-time Olympic gold medalist said she's experienced mental health issues and years of self-harm because of hiding it. Now, though, Dame Kelly says she could cry with relief. And to all dads out there, happy Father's Day. The Duke of Cambridge has released a special photo of him laughing with his children during a family holiday last year. The picture shows Prince William with his arms around Prince George and Princess Charlotte, whilst Prince Louis sits on his shoulders. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, let's get back to political correction.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison, and today I'm joined by Paul Embry in Norfolk, and in Northern Ireland by Arlene Foster. We are here as ever for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists. It's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we're talking about the government's Rwanda asylum plan after a dramatic last-minute ruling by the European Court of Human Rights cancelled the inaugural flight on Tuesday night. A march organised by the Trade Union Congress took place in London yesterday as the group called for a pay rise for public sector workers and a £15 minimum wage. We discussed whether the day was a success. We're also talking about Scottish independence after First Minister Nicola Sturgeon unveiled what she called a refreshed case for another referendum. And as always, we want to hear from you this morning. And with rail strikes set to happen this week, we're asking how much they will affect you in your day-to-day life. Let us know. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Home Secretary Priti Patel has told MPs that the government remains committed to sending asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. It comes after an intervention from the European Court of Human Rights, which led to the first flight being cancelled just minutes before takeoff this week. The Rwanda asylum plan, which was announced in April, intends to take some asylum seekers who arrive in the UK on a one-way ticket to Rwanda to claim asylum there instead. So, Arlene, I'm going to start with you here. What did you make of this last-minute intervention from the European Court of Human Rights?
Well, first of all, what did I make? The government must have been completely frustrated. They had set out their plan, they had made arrangements, and then to be stopped at the very last minute by, I think it's called a Section 39 interim order from Strasbourg must have been so frustrating for them, I have to say. I mean, there is, and I was reading Priti Patel's article in the Daily Telegraph this morning. She's given an interview where she says there is an element of racism in the attacks that are coming from the left and indeed from other institutions that should know better. Because there have been plans before with this policy, but there hasn't been the hyperbole that we've heard over this policy. And indeed, I was glad also to see a government spokesperson for Rwanda itself speak out and say, look, how dare you criticise our country? If you want to criticise our country, come and see it, but don't do it from afar. So I think government are now looking at a Bill of Rights, a domestic Bill of Rights to replace the Human Rights Act. I think that's good. But the question is, will that replace the ability for this Section 39 interim order to come in because, of course, it's international law. So they have to be very careful that when they're drafting the new bill that it deals with the possibility of Strasbourg putting their oar in at the very last minute.
Absolutely. And Paul, I want to come back to that point there that Ollie made about the Rwandan government sort of hitting back, because we've discussed this on the show before, that, you know, if asylum seekers were being sent to, I don't know, the Netherlands or Sweden or something, it feels like there'd be much less uproar, doesn't it?
I think that's probably true, actually. I think Priti Patel used the example of Sydney and New York, and I think in those circumstances the protests would probably be a bit more muted. There does seem to be some kind of unconscious racism in the idea of people saying you shouldn't send people to this African hellhole almost. Perhaps not realising the implications of what they're saying. I mean, on the point about Strasbourg, I think it is actually quite disturbing that you can have a situation where two national courts in the UK, the High Court and the Court of Appeal, both saw no legitimate reason to intervene at that stage and to grant interim relief to the claimants, and effectively said that, you know, this flight could go ahead. And then what appears to be the on-duty judge in Strasbourg at the last minute steps in and says, no, we are going to stop that from happening. And effectively, to for the time being at least, to stop an elected government carrying out its policy. And if it is the case that the European Convention on Human Rights does allow that sort of thing, then it seems to me that the writ is running too large. And I think there's another potential dispute further down the line. You know, in terms of the wider policy, because obviously we know that the High Court has said the legalities of the policy need to be reviewed, and I think that review will take place in July. What happens then if the High Court and possibly the Court of Appeal again both say, actually, this policy is okay legally, there's no reason to stop it from being implemented, and the European Court of Human Rights again intervenes, which I think it has the potential to do, and says, well, actually, no, the wider policy is not consistent with the European Convention of Human Rights, then I think we're into a real dispute about who wields power and whether or not a government can be allowed to implement its policy that you know, it's got a big decisive majority, and it was elected to govern. Now, I've got misgivings about the Rwanda policy. I think many people have. But the idea, I think, that unelected European judges can intervene in this way, I think, is quite disturbing.
I think there's been a lot of feedback sort of saying the same. I think there's been some quite lazy comments saying that now that we're out of the EU, this shouldn't be happening. I think there's been confusion over the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights, which are two very different things. But there have been calls for us to potentially look at removing ourselves from the European Convention on Human Rights and thus from the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. But Arlene, am I not right in thinking that there would be potential implications for the Belfast Agreement if that was done?
Yes, and indeed Dan Hannan makes that point today. He's basically saying that there's only one reason to stay in the European Convention on Human Rights, and it's the fact that it is specifically mentioned in the Belfast Agreement, unlike a whole rake of other things that are not mentioned in the Belfast Agreement, but which people say are there. It is actually in the Belfast Agreement. And look, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater here, but I think we do need to have a look at this in a sensible and reasonable way, because I think what you're seeing is judicial activism in the European Court of Human Rights. That's not surprising, given their role, and of course, given the role of judges in other parts of Europe, which is different from the UK. And I think people need to understand that, because judges have a different role in the Constitution. They have a different role in their countries. They take into account cultural norms in different countries, and of course, we may have different cultural norms here in the UK. So, is there a need to look at all of these things? Yes, there is, but I don't think we should rush to just throw everything out. And I also have to say this, though, I think people are saying if we left the European Convention on Human Rights, that the UK would be in some way not, we wouldn't have any human rights here in the UK. Well, I mean, that's a nonsense, because we're not given human rights by the European Court of Human Rights. It just has a judicial oversight of them. We have human rights here in the UK. We're probably one of the best countries in the world for human rights and for the protection of human rights. So I think people just need to calm down, look at it rationally, look at it reasonably. There is a problem, and we need to have a good conversation about that.
Mm-hmm. So, Paul, I want to come to you to talk about sort of Labour's position on this policy, because it seemed to take Keir Starmer a very long time to finally come out with an opinion, and that opinion was if Labour get into power, they'd scrap the policy. But I know we've spoken before about the kind of lack of alternative that's being proposed by the Labour Party. Have you any idea what their plan is?
No, and the truth is, Deanna, that, look, most people, I think, on the left nowadays are pro-open borders. That's the truth of it. Very much a different position to, 20 or 30 years ago, when people on the left, socialists and trade unionists like myself, believed that regulation of the labour supply and proper border control was essential. Not least so governments can plan around welfare, employment, housing, make sure there isn't undue pressure on wages in certain sectors, and so on and so forth. That position of open borders, once upon a time, was only held by Trotskyists, anarchists and hyper-liberals. Now it's very much a mainstream position on the left, and to hold the position of control of the labour supply is almost like a fringe position. So I think many people on the left in the labour movement are quite happy to have an open borders position. But the problem is they're articulating it in bad faith, because they don't say openly, this is our position. They don't say openly, we support open borders, we think everybody should be able to come. So what they will do is they will resist particular policies or particular proposed solutions every time one is proposed. Without actually saying, well, we're going to oppose everything because we're really pro-open borders. And I was struck by a protest that was taking place at Gatwick Airport at the detention centre last week, I think it was, where the protesters were basically saying no nations, no borders, no deportations. And that occasionally, the mask slips, and that really is the position. The problem for Labour, of course, is if they said, we're pro-open borders, they know that it wouldn't be popular in terms of mainstream opinion in this country. So there's a dishonesty on the left, and it really frustrates me as somebody on the left about this debate, because so much of it, I think, is taking place in bad faith.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's this point, isn't there, that it is OK to criticise and critique a policy, but if you want to be the party of government, you have to be able to present some kind of alternative, don't you?
Well, the reality is this: having a situation where thousands of people, mainly young men, are turning up on our shores undocumented every month is simply not sustainable. Now, you can be compassionate, you can want to hold the hand out of solidarity to people who are trying to make a better life for themselves. I understand that. I'm pro-immigration. I think Britain should take its fair share of refugees. But you simply cannot have this situation going on and on and on. It has to stop. You have to break the business model. You have to break the incentive for people to make those dangerous journeys across the channel. And in the absence of anybody proposing any better solutions, then I think what the government has proposed deserves at least to be listened to. I mean, I'm in favour of offshoring for processing reasons. I think if people have their asylum claims validated, then I think we should take those people into our own country. But look, if you're not prepared to put a solution, then it undermines your own argument. You can't really expect people to take you seriously.
Mm-hmm. Well, we want to hear from you. Let us know what you made of the fact that the flight was grounded. Do you think Priti Patel is pursuing the right policy? Send us your thoughts on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, Boris Johnson's ethics advisor resigned on Wednesday evening, saying the Prime Minister forced him into an impossible and odious position. It came a day after Lord Geidt had said there was a legitimate question about whether the PM had broken ministerial rules over Partygate. After officially stepping down from his post, Geidt admitted his resignation letter may have been too cautious, saying the language used may have failed to adequately explain the far wider scope of his resignation. Paul, did you read the letter that Geidt put out? And if so, it was very waffly, wasn't it?
It was, and I think there's been quite a lot of confusion over the real reasons why he resigned. I think the government tried to spin it one way and Guy tried to spin it another way. I mean, I think from what I can gather, he was asked to provide political cover for a potential breach of international law, and he said he didn't want to do that. He wasn't happy at doing that, and okay, fair enough. He's entitled to step down, which which is his prerogative. I suspect one or two people might be fairly surprised at the fact that Boris Johnson had an ethics advisor in the first place, to be honest. But look, most people will not have heard of Lord Guy, let's be blunt. Most people before this story broke would not have even known him if they passed him in the street. So in that sense, I guess it's not a huge story, but what I think it does do is it does add to that general perception of a lack of integrity within Downing Street, a lack of playing by the rules that everybody else is expected to play by. So for that reason alone, regardless of the merits of his resignation and the rights and wrongs of it, I think in terms of PR, it's clearly not very good for Boris Johnson and Number 10.
Mm-hmm. Arlene, I want to come to you on this because there are some who are saying this is another massive blow for Boris Johnson, but is this another one of those stories that really kind of captured the imagination of the sort of Westminster news bubble but didn't really hit anywhere else?
Well, yes, because as Paul says, not very many people know who Lord Gate is. And therefore it is a bit of a Westminster bubble story. I mean, this position of government advisor on ethics was something that was created back in the Blair administration, I understand, about 2006. So it's really a new phenomenon in terms of government. The question is it really needed? Should the permanent secretary, your permanent secretary, not be advising you on whether something is right or wrong in terms of ethics? And why do we have yet another layer of bureaucracy in government? I don't think there's really a need for a specific person to be an ethics advisor. If you have to get advice on ethics, there are plenty of people within the higher echelons of the civil service who are there to give that sort of advice. So it'll be interesting to see now what happens. I think what's more damaging is the fact that two of these advisors have resigned during Boris's time. So to lose one would be a misfortune. To lose two looks like carelessness. And it is something that he will have to reflect on. But, the government advisor on ethics, as I understand it, doesn't really have any teeth. He's only there to advise on whether something is ethical or not. And the fact that he decided to go over steel tariffs on Chinese steel was rather bizarre for a lot of people. Why did he not resign over the other issues that were there? And frankly, it looks as if he just didn't want to be seen to be the man who put the final knife in Vienna. So it's all a bit of a Westminster story, I'm afraid. But what will be interesting to see is what happens now to the position of government ethics advisor.
Well, let's talk about a story that is less a Westminster bubble story, sticking on the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister's faced critique this week over the fact that he was supposedly due to speak at a Northern Research Group conference and then actually didn't speak at the conference because he was visiting Ukraine to give his support to President Zelensky. Paul, what do you make of this? Because it strikes me once again that there's noisy people on both sides of it, but actually most rational people have said the Prime Minister's probably right to be doing this international crisis sort of management.
It just worries me the extent to which we are getting involved in terms of Ukraine. I mean, the Russian invasion is wrong, unquestionably, and we're right to be part of the international voices speaking up against it. But it seems to me that Boris Johnson and the government are making an awful lot of commitments to Ukraine, and I just don't know that we're in a position to make those sorts of commitments, to be honest, Deanna. I mean, the British government has effectively said to Ukraine recently that we will support you to such a degree where we will guarantee your safety permanently in order to prevent any future invasion. Now, that seems to me to be a colossal commitment. And when you look at some of the difficulties we're experiencing in our own country in terms of the economy, when you look at the fact that our own armed services over the last 20 years have been pretty much stripped to the bone, I don't know that we're in a position to be able to make those sorts of long-term commitments. And, it seems to me, actually, that there's a distinct lack of voices in senior positions in public life across the world who are actually making the case for peace. I'm hearing an awful lot of voices making the case for more war and more arms and more fighting. There don't seem to be many people saying, look, we need to get the sides around the table. We need a negotiated settlement. What are the United Nations doing at the moment? As far as I can see, they just haven't intervened at all, and they're proving themselves to be not worth very much. I mean, it was interesting to me that His Holiness the Pope a few weeks ago did speak out and said, look, we need to examine the root causes of this conflict perhaps a little bit more, and we do need to strive towards peace. But his remarks were kind of not particularly covered by the media here or elsewhere, I don't think. So this is a serious business. People are dying. Thousands of people have died in this conflict, and we need people to pursue the case for peace more than is happening at the moment, to be blunt.
Mm-hmm. So, Arlene, just going back to that point there about the kind of Prime Minister's role in the Ukraine conflict, and yet he's getting critique for pulling out of this Northern Research Group conference, saying that clearly it shows he doesn't care about the North, some of the things that are coming out there. As First Minister, you'll have had to kind of prioritise and try and juggle all these different, sometimes very major issues. Do you think the Prime Minister made the right call on this?
Well, I do think he made the right call. I think showing leadership in the way that he has strengthened him. And it's interesting today to see that there's an international poll, Deanna, that has come out to say that Boris Johnson globally is the man that people are identifying as giving the lead against the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So I think that is important. I thought it was very telling, the difference between the photograph of Boris Johnson with Vladimir Zelensky and the photograph of Macron with Zelensky. My goodness, if you're looking for a visual aid on knowing the difference between the two, it was there. Look, I used to hate having to cancel events at the last minute. It is really frustrating for the organisers of the event that you're not going to. It is something that I hated to do because I like to keep my promises to people. When you agree to go to address an organisation or a conference, it's important that you're there because you're given the keynote speech. But the way in which these visits happen to particularly war zones will mean that he wouldn't have known until the very last minute that it was going to go ahead. And if something had have happened that he wasn't able to go, then he would have been with the NRG. And the reality is he has been, as you will know, Deanna, been to the north of England quite a lot recently. And it's not that he's avoiding going up there. So I do have a lot of sympathy for the decisions that had to be taken at the very last minute. But no doubt, I also feel for the organisers of the conference who thought the PM were coming up to address them.
Yeah. Well, send us your thoughts. As always, we want to hear from you. Did the PM make the right decision by going to Ukraine? Should he have been at the Northern Research Group conference? Could he have done both? Send us your views on gbviews@gbnews.uk. And coming up after the break, we're talking about the We Demand Better March, which took place in London yesterday. But as always, we want to hear from you. We've got rail strikes happening this coming week, and we want to know, how do you feel they're going to affect you? Are you worried about getting to hospital appointments, to exams, or just getting into work? Let us know. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. See you after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well,
thank
welcome
you,
back
Sean, for already coming along to the Shadow Cabinet.
Here's Keir Starmer.
I'm really looking forward to working with you. Can I also say thank you to Nick Forbes, who I know is at the back of the room. Nick, so many tributes. Thank you for what you've done for our Labour Party and our Labour movement. Thank you for your leadership. And thank you on behalf of me and everybody here for your friendship as well. Thank you, Nick. And let me add my thanks to the LGA staff, Peter, Martin, Hannah and Annabelle, who've done a fantastic job, and of course Ella and Lewis, who've joined them in that job. Thank you to the staff working so hard all of the time. Thank you. And a special mention for Ellie here, just at the front, who's joined my team and done so much to make this weekend a huge success. And it is really good to see you all, friends and colleagues. There is a real buzz and energy in the place. It was there yesterday, it was there last night, and it's here in the room again today. A real sense of coming together, catching up, excited plans for the future. Zoom is great, but meeting is so much better. And as I look back on the pandemic, those 2 years or so that have gone by, I just think about how the British people rose to greatness. Things we did, looking out for each other, looking after one another. Hidden heroes came out in those 2 years. Our shop workers, our deliverers, our cleaners, our teachers, care workers, and of course the brilliant NHS. But I would add to that roll call you. Our councillors were there during that pandemic as well for our communities. You woke up every day, went to work and put our values, our Labour values, into practice, changing lives and supporting our communities. Thank you for your part in what you've done in the last 2 years. Many of you in positions of leadership, many more of you in positions of leadership after those local elections, which is absolutely fantastic. Champions for your communities, making decisions that make a difference. And some of you in opposition, providing the challenge. And I know how frustrating opposition is. I often say to Georgia, she's in power, I'm in opposition. So I know how frustrating it is. But what you do is important. And keep that flame burning. Look what happened in Westminster. Look what happened in Worthing. 5 years or so ago, I see some Worthing at the back there. 5 years ago, we only had one councillor in Worthing, and now we run the council. That's the aspiration. And that takes me to those local government results. Because we've shown that we're back on track. We're winning in places where we need to win if we're going to win a general election. Look at Cumberland. I know it's a new authority, but sitting below Cumberland, behind Cumberland, is Copeland, Workington and Carlisle. 3 seats that we need to win. Rosendale up in Lancashire, same story. Kirklees. And go to the other end of the country, Southampton, Worthing, and of course, most recently, Crawley, showing that coast to coast across the country in the seats that we need to win, we can win and we will win.
Well, that is Kier Starmer there, who is currently giving a speech in Warwick at local Labour government conference. Apparently, later in his speech, he's due to accuse the Tories of hoarding power in Westminster while squandering the potential of the rest of the country. So, Paul, I want to talk to you about this. This is a big opportunity for Starmer to talk to councillors, some of his big activist base, and to really sort of set out his stall. It sounds like he's going to talk a lot about levelling up and devolution and be quite critical of the government. Is that the right approach, do you think, or do you think he's slightly missing the tone of the big issues that his membership and indeed his voters care about?
Levelling up for me is about having a plan, about having a vision, about having a clear economic vision of how you want to rebalance the economy, how you want to reduce the gap between rich and poor, how you're going to tackle regional inequalities, boardroom excesses, how you're going to get real wages rising. It's about much more than simply moving a Whitehall department to the north or introducing free ports and stuff like that. And to be honest, then I don't think either party has necessarily grasped that at the moment. I think if you said to either party, like, how are we going to revive our industrial base, for example? How are we going to rehabilitate manufacturing in this country? How are we going to restore some of those thousands of blue-collar jobs and industries that we've lost overseas in recent years? How are we going to make ourselves more competitive? How are we going to get productivity and investment up? How are we going to build the houses that people need in this country? And it seems to me that neither party has really got the solutions. And until, frankly, the Labour Party comes up with a vision for that sort of thing that really resonates with the concerns of ordinary working class people, then it would be very complacent to assume it's going to win the next election. You cannot just rely on the Tories failing. You cannot just rely on the Tories becoming unpopular. You have to have a bold vision economically and also in terms of culturally, closing that cultural gap that has opened up widely between the Labour Party and working class communities in recent years. Those are the 2 points of focus I think the Labour Party needs to adopt, and I don't see much progress on either of them at the moment.
And Arlene, I want to talk about these sort of major conferences because they're often seen as real pivotal moments in leadership. But actually, you know, from your experience as First Minister of speaking at such conferences, do they make much of a difference?
Well, sometimes for those of us looking in at conferences, they can seem pretty dull. And I have to say that sounded pretty dull because, of course, what he was doing there at the start of his speech was reaching out to the different parts of his party and saying, oh, well done to X and well done to Y. And we've taken the council and we only had one councillor there in the past. And so he's really trying to talk to his members. Meanwhile, all of the press are there looking for the little bit of a speech that's going to have relevance to the wider public. And of course, that has been already trailed because he's talking about levelling up and he's talking about the fact that the Tories aren't going to deliver on levelling up. But actually, the Tories have the power to deliver levelling up, as you know, Diana, because in the Internal Market Act that has now been in place for I think it was 2019, although I stand to be corrected on that. They have the power to act even in devolved administrations if they believe that they can act in a way which would be good for the citizens of that area. So they can act in Scotland, they can act in Northern Ireland and in Wales, and indeed right across England. So they need to use those powers. They need to identify, as Paul says, where the gaps are, what do we need to do, what intervention is needed to help that particular area. Because I always go back to the fact that if the union is to mean anything, the union of the United Kingdom is the union has to work for all parts. No matter where you live in the United Kingdom, you should be able to have the same access to services and be economically viable as any other part of the union. So that's why levelling up is important. I know it's a vision, but we need to start implementing the vision now and to see it making a real difference right across the UK.
Well, this was in response to Kier Starmer's speech, which is going on right now in Warwick at the Labour Local Government Conference. We may dip back into it in a little while, so don't go anywhere. But first, we are going to talk about protests because yesterday, thousands of people gathered in London to take part in a cost of living march organised by the Trade Union Congress. Speaking about the We Demand Better march, the TUC said that working people have had enough, adding, we need help with energy bills and a real pay rise for every worker. Paul, we know that you are a good trade union man and you love a good protest, so why weren't you there yesterday?
Well, I must say I've been on hundreds of these protests in the past, and I've done my bit, but I was under strict instructions from my wife yesterday to carry out a list of domestic duties. So it was either miss the march or have divorce papers served upon me. So I decided to go for the former. But it was a good march, I think. I think it was very much needed. As I've argued on the programme before, I think there are millions of workers in this country who are sick and tired of being told that they constantly have to pay the price for economic crises that were not of their making. First of all, the global financial crisis in 2008, and frankly, we're still suffering the reverberations of that even now, and more recently, the cost of living crisis too. And in a situation where real wages continue to fall, in a situation where people, especially with the recent interest rate rise, are likely to be struggling to pay their mortgages, problems with fuel bills, people suffering from insecure transient employment, people struggling to get on the housing ladder. I think the message from the TUC march, and it's an absolutely right message, is that this economy is not working for millions of people. And frankly, we need radical intervention. We need a radical reordering of the economy so that people aren't going to suffer in the way that they would otherwise suffer. And the thing is, Deanna, what frustrates people as well is directors' pay always seems to be secured. I mean, executive pay has raced ahead of the average worker's pay over recent years. And some people, as we know, did very nicely out of the pandemic. And the gap between rich and poor in this country seems to me to be as wide as ever and increasing still. So the message from the march needs to be taken seriously, because I think many people have had enough.
You talk about directors' pay. I could make the point about trade union leadership pay there, couldn't I? Because they tend to be on a pretty good salary compared to a lot of their members too. But there's a question I want to ask Paul, and this is about the actual kind of purpose of marches, because ideally the purpose is to try and influence policy or political decisions in the way in which the people on the march want, right? But I get very confused with the messaging, because this march was supposed to be about pay and kind of work standards. And so there were placards that said, if our pay doesn't rise, we will. But then other placards saying, kick the Tories out, nurses not nukes, support the rail workers' strike, end racism at work now, free Assange. I mean, do you find that you get these sort of militant lefties who all come along to have their say and get involved just for the fun of it? And do you think that then dilutes the message for kind of the public and for the politicians who they're supposed to be trying to influence?
Well, as I say, I mean, I've been on many, many marches of this kind over the last 30 years, and you will always get hangers-on. You will always get activists from disparate, particularly far-left groups, in some cases anarchists, in some cases revolutionaries, in some cases communists, who will, and frankly, the members of the public, they're as entitled to join the march as much as anybody, and they will tag on to the march, and they will often have their own themes and their own messages. It's impossible, frankly, to police that. When you're marching along a public highway, then really you can't stop who joins you. But what I would say to people is, look, of the thousands of people there yesterday, the vast majority would consider themselves to be part of the mainstream. What they're arguing for is a pay rise, frankly. That's the number one message. We're fed up with having to pay the price of economic crisis, both in the past and now. Our real wages are going through the floor, our living standards are crashing, and the government is not doing enough to rectify that situation. That is the ordinary message from most marchers there yesterday, and I really think that will resonate much more widely across the country.
Well, let's stick on this theme, Arlene, because this week it looks as though there are going to be some pretty vast rail strikes, which are going to have an impact on thousands, if not millions of people around the country. But we've heard trade union leaders now saying that they think there could be much broader strikes over the summer, a sort of summer of discontent, as it's been dubbed. Do you think that the trade unions are kind of justified in this, particularly given it tends to be about pay, against the backdrop of the really difficult economic circumstances we face because of COVID?
Well, there's a number of things, Deanna, and first of all, it's good to see where the division of labour is in the Embry household. I'm delighted to see that. But in terms of what's happening and what looks as if it's coming down the road at us all, it looks as if the unions have been saving up for this big push against the Tory government. And it looks as if they're coordinating. When I see posters from Unite the Union advertising how much people can get when they're on strike, and that has increased to £70 per day now. So in other words, if you go on strike, you're going to be able to get £70 a day. So don't worry about going on strike. And it worries me, Diana, because this is all under the banner of standing up for workers' rights. But there are many workers who aren't going to be able to get to their work now next week. They're going to have to stay at home if they can. Many of us will still have to travel, of course, for our work. And never mind that, what about medical appointments? What about those children who are sitting critical exams, their A-levels, their end-of-term exams? So I think they're punishing, and I do echo Grant Shapps in this, they are punishing millions of workers right across the United Kingdom. I think it's shameful. I think there are obviously other ways to deal with this. It looks as if they aren't trying to find solutions to deal with this. They have decided they're going to have this number of strikes, which will have a huge impact on the economy. And, you know, workers don't stand apart from the economy. It's a point I've made before in this programme. If we're supposed to be standing up for workers, look at the amount of damage that this is going to do to the economy over the coming weeks. And, you know, I hear Paul saying that workers shouldn't have to pay the price for the pandemic and workers shouldn't have to pay the price for what has happened in the economy, but they're part of the economy. And if the economy is not doing well, then everybody suffers. And this is a fundamental point. And I just think it's wrong to say that this is somehow standing apart from what's actually going on in the bigger picture. I just am at a loss to see where we're going with all of this, because it looks as if this isn't going to be the last of the strikes. We're going to see more strikes from more organisations over the summer. And this is going to have a big, big impact on the economy just when we're coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, well, I was reading a few days ago that the rail strikes alone, UK hospitality are really concerned that it might cost the hospitality sector alone over this coming week about £500 million, which, you know, is going to have an impact for people working in the industry, especially after the industry's had a really, really rough couple of years because of the pandemic. So watch this space. Let us know. Get in contact with us. How do you feel the rail strikes are going to impact you? If you've got exams coming up, medical appointments, let us know. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, the government has approved the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to the United States, where he faces espionage charges. Assange is wanted in the US over an alleged conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defence information. That's after his company published hundreds of thousands of leaked documents relating to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Assange's legal team have said they'll be appealing the decision, and in a statement, WikiLeaks said that this is only the beginning of a new legal battle. Paul, this is a story that's particularly kind of piqued your interest. What do you make of the extradition order?
I think it's an appalling decision, Deanna. I think it's an indefensible decision. Julian Assange, who I have to say I don't particularly like as an individual, but his only crime was to release information that embarrassed the US government and that exposed some of the wrongdoing that the US was guilty of in Iraq and Afghanistan, and exposed some of the appalling behaviour that was taking place inside of Guantanamo Bay. I don't think there's any serious evidence to suggest that the information he leaked put any lives in danger. So it seems to me that this is a political extradition, and one that I think will potentially have a chilling effect on freedom of expression and investigative journalism, because frankly, if you were an investigative journalist who did come by information, the like of which Julian Assange came by, then probably having watched this story develop, you would think twice about publishing that information. And that's a situation I don't think we should ever find ourselves in. And what I found bitterly ironic, actually, was that the decision by Priti Patel to approve Assange's extradition came on the same day as the 50th anniversary of Watergate. Now, Watergate was, I think, one of the examples of great investigative journalism doing its job properly and doing its job well. So I can't see in any way how Priti Patel can defend this decision. I think there's a wider debate to be had about the US-UK extradition treaty, which I think is fundamentally unbalanced and seems to work far more in the favour of America than it does the UK. But the idea that America can just reach in to Britain and extradite someone, even when what that person has done does not necessarily constitute a crime under UK law, I think is deeply, deeply disturbing. And I would like to see members of the media who have got an interest in this coming out more forcefully and standing against it.
Arlene, do you share Paul's analysis there?
Well, I share some of it. I do think that it's time to look at the treaty again. And David Davis has been saying that there's a need to make sure that there's equity between what happens both ways. I think that's important. But I probably do disagree with Paul in relation to Priti Patel, because it appears that she had little option but to approve what the court had decided back in April. She had just 2 months to approve that. And there was very little room for manoeuvre. I mean, it'll be set out very clearly as to how she can disagree with the court, and she will have been given advice on that. And I would imagine there was very little discretion. So we can argue about the fact of whether he should be extradited or not, but on the process point, I would imagine that Priti Patel had very little room for manoeuvre.
Well, joining us now to discuss this story further is human rights lawyer David Haig. David, thank you for joining us on the show this morning. I guess my first question here is, can you just give us a rough timeline of how we've got to this point? Because the Julian Assange case is quite confusing given some of the intricate elements to it. So from the point of WikiLeaks to here, how has it all come about?
I mean, it's been a very long time. It's more than a decade, nearly 12 years, I think, that this has been dragging on in one way or another. And obviously in the UK, we're all very familiar with sites of Julian Assange outside the Ecuadorian embassy and various other things. But most recently, there was a US extradition attempt to bring Julian Assange to the US. And essentially what happened at the lowest court found that couldn't happen because there was a real risk of various abuses of his human rights. One of those things was essentially a long solitary confinement, which can be found to be a form of torture. That was effectively overturned by the High Court on the basis of various assurances that were given by the US to the UK on how it would or wouldn't treat Julian Assange. And then effectively, trying to sum this up quite quickly, the Supreme Court would not permit appeals by Julian Assange and his legal team. So that then meant that the Home Secretary, as Arlene, I think, commented on, effectively had something of almost a rubber stamping type exercise, although there was scope that she could have looked into it a little bit further because there's history of that. I don't know if anyone remembers the case. There was a case of Gary McKinnon. He was a young British hacker some time ago, ironically looking for UFO evidence in America, and managed to hack a significant number of US government computers. In that case, and this was back when Theresa May was the Home Secretary and Kier Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecution, so some time ago, she actually intervened and stopped his extradition to the US on the basis of his Asperger's symptom and mental health. So there is some limited precedent for Priti Patel to step in. So that's effectively where we are. The next stages legally there's effectively two routes. One is because the decision of Priti Patel is a government one, it can then be reviewed again by the courts through a thing called judicial review. So effectively it goes back to the High Court. And the other is to the European Court of Human Rights.
So, David, Assange's family have stated that there will be an appeal here. So you've said there could be two different routes. Which route is it that they're pushing for?
They're going for both of them. I think the first one will be, they've obviously got 14 days. And if nothing happens in that 14 days, effectively, the US could effectively send a plane. So they've indicated they will do both, and I'm sure that they will be doing them both in parallel. I mean, previously, until the decision that we saw in the ECHR with Rwanda, usually that would be a lengthy process, but it may be that that's speeded up.
Brilliant. And David, I mean, where do you see this going? I mean, there's not so much past precedent for this particular extradition sends, but if you were a betting man to put your money on it, do you think that the extradition will get blocked or not?
I think, like Paul said, it's an incredibly worrying situation because of the signals that it sends to not just the US, but authoritarian and countries around the world that want to basically control journalists and cover up the truth. So I think it's a very, very significant step as to what happens next. And I think everyone will be watching, obviously, including journalists. It's very, very concerning. I would suspect that he will be sent. However, I think there is uncertainty because we're at a situation where you have a new Bill of Rights coming in, which, according to Dominic Raab, is meant to strengthen free speech. Will that be in time? Will it not? We're not sure. Because obviously that will replace the Human Rights Act. So I think it's back to the courts. But what we've got to consider is that the courts have already decided, the High Court have already decided that he could effectively be extradited. So we're now being sent back to them. However, the legal team of Julian Assange have said they will raise effectively new points that they've not considered before, such as focusing more on freedom of speech. So it may be a different outcome. But I think it's incredibly concerning, and it's clear, I think, that it's a political manoeuvre, and that's I think that's something that's very, very worrying.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, thank you for your insights this morning. David Haig, their human rights lawyer, commenting on the recent news that Julian Assange is due to be extradited. Now, this week, Nicola Sturgeon unveiled what she called a refreshed case for Scottish independence. During a press conference in Edinburgh, Scotland's First Minister said her government had an indisputable mandate for a second independence referendum, as she launched the first of a series of papers setting out the case to break away from the UK. Opposition parties have accused the Scottish Government of being obsessed with independence, and Boris Johnson has said the 2014 referendum result should be respected. Well, to discuss Scottish independence further, we're delighted to say we're now joined by a political pundit and Managing Director of East Points West, James Melville. James, thank you for joining us this morning. What do you make of Nicola Sturgeon's announcement on this consultative referendum?
I welcome it, actually. I mean, I've got issues with how the Scottish Government have approached COVID, but that's a very, very different issue to actually independence. My view is that Scotland has a democratic deficit right now, which has been going on for a long time. The Tory government hasn't won a national election in Scotland for over 65 years, and Brexit is happening against the will of the Scottish people. And it's a bit rich for Boris Johnson to say you can't have another referendum, considering circumstances have changed a lot since the last one 8 years ago. I'm a believer in democracy, and I'm a believer that Scottish people should be deciding their own fate, whether that is for independence or not. And I think the time is now right for another independence referendum, 8 years on from the last one.
And James, looking at the current polling, I mean, it fluctuates. It's seemingly week to week and month to month. But I think the most recent polling I've seen has shown that there's actually a slight majority in favour of remaining part of the UK. Would that concern you if there was a second referendum?
Well, that's up to the Scottish people to decide. I mean, if you look at the last time in 2014, the Yes campaign started at quite a low base and then it tightened towards the actual referendum. You know, that's up to the Scottish people to decide. I think there now has to be a conversation about another referendum, which is what Sturgeon's doing. I think she does have a mandate for it if you combine, in terms of total seats, the SNP and the Greens within the Scottish Parliament. And I think basically 8 years on, considering there is that deficit of democracy in Scotland, as I touched on, it's up to the Scottish people to decide. And if they go for independence, that's up to them. If they don't, then that will actually settle it, I think, for another generation. But considering circumstances have changed a lot in Scotland over the last 8 years, I think it's time for the Scottish people to decide.
Mm. And so if there was this consultative referendum, James, my understanding is that it wouldn't kind of be legally enforceable in the same way as a main referendum, but it would actually then empower the Scottish Government to embark on independence talks with the UK. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. You end up in a situation what's happened with Catalonia and Spain. I mean, in an ideal situation, Johnson would grant it, but that's the absurdity of the whole thing. You know, Scotland's having to go cap in hand again with the Scottish Government and the British government squabbling over whether they can have another referendum. Johnson, if he's a true believer in democracy that he claims to be, should be granting that. But it's a ludicrous state of affairs that effectively the final decision on a verified referendum is with the British government. That's part of the whole problem of the debate. If it isn't given and granted by the British government, then there is a danger that you could end up having, say, the unionist side of the debate boycotting the actual referendum. I think what we need to do is a bit of grown-up politics here and actually adhere to the very principles of the will of the people and democracy. The first stage on a referendum should be a legitimate referendum, and then it's up to the Scottish people to decide from that.
And James, we've got very little time left, so I'm going to need a quick answer, but there's an argument that the independence issue is distracting from other issues like, education, etc. Very quick answer. Do you think that's the case, or is this absolutely the right approach?
Well, I think there is an argument for that, because like any good government, they need to be focusing on serving the needs of the people, issue by issue, whether it's education or health or whatever. But democracy is part of that debate. And I think based on the change of circumstances, the approach of the British government, which is not democratic at all in this, Sturgeon is right to open that debate. But in an ideal solution, it will be a referendum on the same sort of terms and conditions in terms of the question and the authority as happened in 2014.
Brilliant. Well, James Melville there joining us to discuss Nicola Sturgeon's moves on Scottish independence. But don't go anywhere. We've got one more hour of cracking debate and analysis coming up. And of course, we want to hear from you. Get in touch with us with your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk. See you after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up on The Political Correction, we discuss the latest on the plans to override the Northern Ireland Protocol. Our regular We Work For You segment with Andrew Bridgen MP. 50 years on from Watergate, what is the legacy of the world's biggest political scandal? And a new report finds that public sector workers moonlighting as trade union reps cost the taxpayer up to £100 million a year. We'll discuss this with the organisation who published the report. And as ever, we want to hear your views, so get in touch with us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. That plus plenty more after the latest news with Bethany.
Thanks, Deanna. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The Transport Secretary is accusing the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union of punishing millions of innocent people over the 3-day strike next week. Grant Shapps says the union has ignored requests to negotiate a deal to stop the industrial action on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. The union claims rising inflation means its members, who've had a 3-year pay freeze, have now taken a 20% pay cut. Labour claim the government want the strikes to go ahead to stoke political divisions. And RMT's former Assistant General Secretary, Steve Headley, told GB News he agrees with Labour.
They want a distraction from soaring fuel prices, from the cost of living crisis, and they want to take on the unions. It's a great distraction. It's red meat for the Tory voters. They rally the party faithful. So I think we do, and I think this strike's really avoidable. I think we should be still around the negotiating table, but rather than negotiate in good faith with the unions, Shapps seems more interested in the latest soundbite in the press.
The Labour leader has warned the government's levelling up plan agenda will fail if they don't devolve power outside of Whitehall. The Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Michael Gove, has previously said it's essential to address the UK's regional inequalities. But speaking at a party conference in Coventry earlier, Sir Keir Starmer accused the Tories of hoarding power in the capital, which is hurting regional communities.
Hoarding power has consequences. The Tory economic record is terrible. Low growth for 12 years. Stagnant wages. And the reason for this is we're not making the most of every part of our country. We're squandering the potential in our towns, in our cities, in our coastal areas and our rural communities. All the places that you represent. We're squandering the potential. And the cost of living crisis is born of this.
The new head of the army has warned British troops must prepare to fight in Europe as the war in Ukraine continues. General Sir Patrick Sanders wrote to his soldiers about the challenges they face. He said there's a burning imperative to build an army that is capable of fighting against Russia. It comes after the Prime Minister returned from his trip to Ukraine's capital yesterday, saying we need to steel ourselves for a long war. A loan that provides emergency funds to financially vulnerable is to be broadened out to 20,000 people. The no-interest loan scheme is backed by the government but run by credit unions and other lenders. It helps those who'd otherwise be turned down for not being able to afford interest payments to buy things like laptops, school uniforms and household essentials. The scheme is being trialled in Manchester and will be rolled out to other parts of the UK from September. In the US, 2 COVID vaccines have been authorised for children as young as 6 months old. Federal regulators have approved the Moderna jab for children under 5 years and the Pfizer jab for children under 4. Public health officials say despite coronavirus being more mild in young people, they should be vaccinated before the new school year to help prevent an increase in transmission. President Joe Biden says the rollout could begin as early as next week. Olympic champion Dame Kelly Holmes has shared her relief at coming out after decades of living in fear around her sexuality. In an interview with the Sunday Mirror, the 52-year-old says she's known since she was 17 when she was in the Women's Royal Army Corps, but she kept it a secret out of fear of repercussions. The 2-time Olympic gold medalist says she's experienced mental health issues and years of self-harm because of hiding it. Now, though, Dame Kelly says she could cry with relief. And to all the dads out there, happy Father's Day. The Duke of Cambridge has released a special photo of him laughing with his children during a family holiday last year. The picture shows Prince William with his arms around Prince George and Princess Charlotte, whilst Louis sits on his shoulders. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get back to political correction.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. Coming up this hour, we discuss the government's new legislation to override the Northern Ireland Protocol. Will the move satisfy unionist voices? Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen tells us about his work in Westminster and in his Leicestershire constituency. And 50 years since Watergate, how did the ultimate political scandal shape the world we live in today? And if you want to get involved in the conversation and have your thoughts read out at the end of our show, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. This is The Political Correction. This week, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss presented a bill to Parliament aiming to legally override parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, following months of opposition from unionist voices. I'm going to come straight to you on this one, Arlene. Tell us a little bit about the actual legislation and what kind of your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, so there were two ways probably to deal with the ongoing difficulties with the protocol, either to trigger Article 16, which wouldn't have brought about an immediate end to all of the problems. It probably would have brought us into mediation with the European Union, or to actually have legislation put onto the domestic statute book, which dealt with the internal market. Now, if you look at the protocol, and goodness, have we all not had to look at the protocol recently, it talks about respecting the internal market of the United Kingdom, but then actually goes about dismantling the internal market of the UK by putting up barriers between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I'll give you a little example. There was a news story in our papers here in Northern Ireland, the newsletter, I think, just last week, where a florist who normally would have sourced his flowers and plants from England has now to source them from either the Republic of Ireland or Holland. That has doubled his prices, but he has had to do that because the person who he used to get his goods from simply doesn't want to go through all of the paperwork and cost, so they have stopped supplying Northern Ireland. And there are a lot of suppliers in England now not supplying Northern Ireland because of the cost and because of the paperwork. And therefore, trade diversion is taking place. And trade diversion means that instead of the internal market of the UK functioning, people in Northern Ireland, small businesses, entrepreneurs are having to look for their goods elsewhere, and that's just not acceptable in terms of the United Kingdom. So this bill that has been led by the Foreign Secretary seeks to deal with that. It also seeks to deal with the problem for unionists around the Act of Union. It says right at the beginning that the Act of Union will be respected. But of course, it's not how a bill starts, as you will know, Deanna, it's how a bill ends. And we'll be watching very carefully to see what amendments are put forward and whether that nullifies what has started out as a reasonable bill, I have to say. But we'll wait and see what happens as it passes through the legislature.
It's too, because the European Union are kind of up in arms about this legislation. Those in support say the legislation aims to actually protect our own union. What do you make of it? Do you think the government is getting the balance right on this? And do you think the EU are acting as fair actors?
No, they're not acting as fair actors. I mean, they've had 18 months to deal with the difficulties that have been very obvious right from the start. They, of course, are the only people that have triggered Article 16, you'll remember, over vaccines back in January of last year. And they have refused to negotiate in a meaningful way. And Lord Frost put forward a command paper with a lot in it last July. There's been no response to that. And it's quite disingenuous from the European Union to say that they're shocked at what has happened, because they have refused to seek a new mandate from their member states to deal with these issues. Meanwhile, we have the Republic of Ireland saying, oh, we must negotiate this out and we must deal with this. And Brussels is saying, well, we're not negotiating anymore. That's the end of it. It's either the protocol or nothing. So this is a bit like Europe always, Deanna, if I can say this. When David Cameron went to seek changes to our relationship with the European Union, the answer was more Europe. And a bit like that, the Europeans are saying, no, the protocol is the answer. No, it's not the answer. It has to be something better than the protocol and something that actually does respect not only the Belfast Agreement, but the internal market of the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, over to you on this. What's your stance? Do you think the EU are kind of being fair actors in this? Do you think the government's overstepping?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that something needs to change on the protocol for exactly the arguments that Arlene outlined. And I mean, the reading that I've done on it, the government's arguing, I think with some legitimacy, that international law allows nation states to disapply certain obligations within international law where it's necessary to safeguard an essential interest. And of course, what the government is saying is, well, it's an essential interest that Stormont is able to be reconvened so that we can again have a properly functioning government in Northern Ireland. And also, it's an essential interest, I think, to say that the tensions that have arisen in the province as a result of the problems over the protocol, particularly the anger on the unionist side, that needs to be quelled, and that's an essential interest in terms of making sure that we are able to quell those tensions. So, yes, I think there's a case to say something needs to change, and providing you can prove that it's an essential interest in the way that you go about it, which I think that the government is doing, then I don't necessarily think that's unreasonable.
And Paul, we know that the Labour Party, for whatever reason in recent years, often gets itself sort of tied up in knots over Brexit issues. How do you think they're going to respond on this particular piece of legislation?
Well, this is a potential bear trap for the Labour Party, I think, because one of the big problems of the Labour Party over the last few years, certainly in terms of the perception of the Labour Party in the eyes of many of its voters who once upon a time voted Labour but now have gone to the Tories because they said they'd get Brexit done, and many of these former Labour voters voted for Brexit, of course. If they see once again the Labour Party lining up with the European Union, doing everything it can to give the impression that the EU is being completely reasonable and is in the right legally, politically, in every other sense, and that the British government is again in the wrong, then they can take that free kick. But the danger is they're just going to further alienate the very voters, including millions of Brexit voters, who they need to win back. So if they were to listen to me, which they never would do, of course, but if they were, I would counsel them to be very wary about falling into that particular bear trap.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly going to be interesting times in Parliament, and as Arlene said, seeing what kind of amendments come forward to that piece of legislation as well. But as always, we'll still be here on GB News discussing it, because it's important that we talk about the issues that are affecting those of you watching at home right across the country, not just in that Westminster bubble. And that's why we talk about Northern Ireland, given all that is going on. But we also want to hear from you, as we've said, so we're going to quickly read out a few of your views now before we do a big hit at the end of the show. We've got Matt here, who says, can I just say that David Haig is a legend? He was set up in Dubai by a previous majority shareholder of Leeds United. He's a true Leeds United supporter, and it's good to see him back. And then Paul on the Julian Assange story. The USA is not a safe country to send Assange to. Look at the January 6 prisoners kept in prison without charge for 17 months. Arlene, do you have some views for us?
Yeah, I have. Helen says if Sturgeon wants a referendum, that's the First Minister, obviously, then I think that everyone in the UK should have a vote, not just Scotland. And I thought it was interesting when I listened to James Melville talk about Brexit and how Scotland had voted against Brexit, and then he believes in democracy. Brexit was a UK-wide vote. I say that in slow terms because I am fed up listening to this, trying to devolve off different parts of the UK as so-and-so didn't vote for Brexit and X didn't vote for Brexit. It was a UK-wide vote. Simple. Let us not raise that issue again. It is very frustrating, I have to say.
And Paul?
Yeah, I've got one from Alan, who says, with the RMT leading the way for pay rises and causing absolute chaos, this will inevitably open the doors for others to ask for pay rises. We've just come out of a 2-year pandemic, and the country needs to get back on its feet financially. This is our money, taxpayers' money. Why can't people just give it a year to get some more money in the pot and then ask for pay rises then? Well, all I would say to Alan is if we were to listen to people who always said, well, let's give it a year and see how it goes, then workers over the decades would never have gained any advances on pay, conditions of service or anything else, frankly. So that's Alan.
Well, do keep your views coming in. We're going to read more out towards the end of the show. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But as you know, here on The Political Correction, we explore the work done by our members of Parliament, what they get up to on the ground and in Westminster to serve as our legislators, and what they do for their constituents who elect them. And this week, I'm delighted to say we're joined by the Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire, Andrew Bridgen. Andrew, thank you for your time this morning. So you were elected back in 2010 and you've been campaigning on an awful lot of things since then. But one of the first ones I want to talk to you about is your work on the Horizon scandal with the Post Office submasters. So,
well, Deanna, that was the first, I think, probably the first piece of casework that arrived when I got elected in 2010. One of my constituents, Mr. Michael Rudkin, and his wife kept the local post office in Ibstock. And that was then been a 12-year campaign to prove that the sub-postmasters were innocent. It was all a problem with the Horizon software system they were forced to use. I think we've established that they were innocent. It's the biggest miscarriage of justice, I imagine, in by number in our country's history. It's all now about getting them the right compensation. I'm hoping that we're going to get that done for the vast majority of the victims by Christmas. So I'm still pressurising Paul Scully, the small business minister, who's got responsibility for the post office. But I'll be giving evidence in July to the public inquiry, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of how this huge miscarriage of justice, A, happened, and B, went on for so long.
And Andrew, let's talk about that, because I think sometimes there's a perception that as politicians we can kind of click our fingers and get things done very quickly. But in this case, it has taken a very long time for kind of justice to be done. Has that been quite frustrating for you as someone who's been campaigning on this?
I didn't quite catch the end of your question there, Deanne. It's quite a bad line. Just say that a bit again.
Sorry, Andrew, just has it been quite frustrating for you waiting sort of 12 years and campaigning on this for such a lengthy time?
Yeah, it wasn't just me. There were 5 MPs that we formed the Post Office Review Group back in 2011. We managed in 2012 to persuade the Post Office to allow forensic accountants to go and check out the Horizon system. By 2015, we had enough evidence that the postmasters, sub-postmasters were, if not innocent, it was certainly, there were unsafe convictions. And the frustration is that, you know, this could have been dealt with 7 years ago. The Post Office decided to get engaged in fighting huge litigation against the sub-postmasters, which took 5 years, and they lost, but spent hundreds of millions of pounds trying to basically play checkbook litigation, where they were going to outspend the sub-postmasters because they had the unlimited resources of the government effectively, or the state behind them. And that's really disappointing, because it is a huge miscarriage of justice, and it's gone on for a lot longer than it needed to. And the victims, they will get money, and they'll get considerable compensation to which they're entitled, but they're never going to get those years back. And that was years when their good name was blackened. But you know what Parliament's like. You need to have enough colleagues around you that believe in what you're doing to actually get anything through in Parliament.
Yeah, quite right. And so that's a sort of more of a national issue that you've been campaigning on, because it's affected sub-postmasters right across the country. But you're also campaigning really hard on local transport issues, particularly on the Ivanhoe railway line, but also on the tram link. Is it from East Midlands Airport to East Midlands Parkway? How's that campaigning going?
Well, it's good. We had some very good news actually yesterday. Wendy Morton tipped me the wink on Friday that we were going to get the Ivanhoe line into, renew our railway fund, and we're going to get through to the next level of funding. I don't know your situation in your constituency, but although I'm the centre of population of the UK, as far from the sea as you can get, Middle England, we actually don't have a passenger railway station in North West Leicestershire. And we'd like to. We do have a disused mineral line now. So we've still got the track bed, we've still got some track, and we would like to reopen the Ivanhoe line. It would link up Leicester with Burton-on-Trent. All the constituencies along the way of the different political parties are supportive, and it would be a vital piece of infrastructure. That would go through Ashby and Colville, straight through the middle of my constituency. That would be good. The top end of Castle Donington, we've got East Midlands Airport, we've got the Gateway new industrial estate, and having had a meeting last week or the week before with Andrew Gilligan at number 10, the transport SPAD, he's very, very supportive of the tram line coming out from Nottingham to East Midlands Parkway, which is right just over the border in Nottingham from North West Leicestershire, and then bring it across the Trent, as I've asked for, come to the Gateway, come to East Midlands Airport, and then go on to Donington Racetrack. Currently, I've got about 10,000 people work at the Gateway Industrial Estate. They're all happy to come by car. There's 8,500 people work at East Midlands Airport. They're coming by car every day. There's, in normal times, 90,000 people a week flying out of East Midlands Airport, and they're having to come by car. And of course, we've got next door, we've got Donington Racetrack, where they have events where there can be 50 to 100,000 people visiting. And again, there's not sufficient public transport for them. So if we can get all those people out of their cars and onto the tram, either by all the way from Nottingham or coming to Parkway and changing there, that's going to make my roads in North West Leicestershire a lot less congested.
And that sounds to me like levelling up in action right there, thanks to the incredible campaigning you're doing. So best of luck with it, and do come back and talk to us if there's any further kind of developments. We want to hear about it here on GB News. Andrew, thank you for your time this morning. That was Andrew Bridgen, MP for North West Leicestershire, talking about his work in his constituency. But don't go anywhere, because coming up next, we're discussing recent comment from Tom Hanks. A former congressman joins us to discuss the legacy of Watergate after this week marked 50 years since the epic scandal began. And as ever, send us your views to gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. See you soon.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. Now, in a recent interview with the New York Times, actor Tom Hanks has said people would not accept the inauthenticity of a straight actor playing a gay character in this day and age. citing his 1993 film Philadelphia, in which he played a gay man who was dying of AIDS. Hanks is not the first person in Hollywood to comment on this issue. Last year, screenwriter Russell T Davies said that only gay actors should play gay roles. Well, joining us now to discuss this issue is human rights and LGBT campaigner Peter Tatchell. Peter, thank you for your time this morning. What do you make of the comments from Tom Hanks? Do you think he's right that only gay actors should be playing gay characters?
I think as a general rule, it's probably better if gay roles are played by gay actors, particularly given the fact that gay actors are often overlooked for major roles. Many of you will remember that when Rupert Everett, the gay actor, came out some years back, he said that his offers of, big major romantic leads suddenly dried up. So I think, to correct the underrepresentation, I think it's probably a good thing. I also think that probably gay actors can give a sense of, authenticity, interpretation, sensitivity that some straight actors may not be able to. But having said that, I don't think it should be a hard and fast rule. I mean, look at a straight actor like Tom Hanks, did play a gay man very convincingly in Philadelphia. Timothy Chalamet played a young gay teenager in Call Me By Your Name very convincingly. So I think, we need to have some degree of openness to assess each particular part and each particular actor.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we're starting to see a kind of conflation of issues between sort of sensitive depictions of LGBT culture, of LGBT representation, and then actually this sort of sentiment by perhaps some more slightly woke people saying that it should be very prescriptive in who plays who? Do you think there is some conflation going on there?
Maybe a bit, but I think it's coming from a good place. I mean, Eddie Redmayne said that, in hindsight, probably he, as a non-trans person, should not have played the trans role. And that's partly a sensitivity to the fact that, trans actors are massively underrepresented in big Hollywood blockbusters. So I think that's a kind and generous position to take. But then again, actors are actors. They are paid to play a role. I mean, I think, for example, Vanessa Redgrave was very convincing in the 1980s series, or film rather, portraying the trans tennis player, Renee Richards. That was a really convincing portrayal where she played both Renee Richards as a woman and as a man with incredible conviction.
Mm-hmm. Paul, over to you.
Peter, isn't the logic of an argument that says that only people with particular characteristics should play characters with those particular characteristics, is that in some cases that actually might work against minorities? I'm thinking, for example, a couple of years ago, Channel 5 broadcast a drama in which Anne Boleyn was played by a black actress, and I'm thinking of Dev Patel, the Asian actor who played David Copperfield, the great Charles Dickens character. Under the argument that says, well, no, if you're not of those characteristics, you shouldn't play those roles, they would have been ruled out of those roles, wouldn't they?
Well, exactly, and that's why I'm saying it shouldn't be a hard and fast rule. And I think that a new portrayal of Anne Boleyn as a black woman was very innovative, and I thought very challenging, interesting, and I liked it. I would not say a hard and fast rule. I think it is down to the individual script and actors and what the actor can bring to the character.
And Peter, how much of an issue do you think LGBT plus representation is in the sphere of acting today? We know that in the past there have been great challenges, as you mentioned, Rupert Everett being a kind of key example. But in this day and age, do you think it's as much an issue? Do you think we've still got a long way to go?
I think it is undoubtedly shifting. It's not as bad as it was, 20 or 30 years ago, and that is a great credit to everyone in the film industry. But I think there is a way to go yet, and I would like to see more gay actors play major Hollywood romantic roles if they are the appropriate person and have otherwise all the qualifications and the abilities. And we don't really see that much, even now.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, one quick one. I know there's a new sort of Pixar movie out at the moment, the Buzz Lightyear feature, which features a same-sex kiss, and as a result has been banned in certain countries. That scene's been removed in certain countries, and there are those saying it's completely inappropriate for children to see that, a view that I certainly don't share. What have you made of the uproar around that?
Well, it is just a kiss, and it's hardly passionate. It's hardly there's nothing sexual about it. It's just a kiss, you know. And I think most young people just think it's sweet. I mean, I have a friend with some kids who saw a same-sex kiss, and the young girls and the boys said, "Oh, isn't that sweet?" They look at it very, very differently, I think, from some adults, which is good, and it's a sign of progress.
Yeah, well, Peter, thank you for joining us this morning. Peter Tatchell there, human rights and LGBT campaigner, talking about Tom Hanks's recent comments. But don't go anywhere, because coming up, should the public sector be allowed to take second jobs as trade union reps at a cost to the taxpayer? We'll discuss this with the Taxpayers Alliance. But first, here's your latest headlines with Bethany.
Good morning. It's 32 minutes past 11. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to get you up to date on GB News. The Transport Secretary is accusing rail unions of punishing millions of innocent people over the planned national rail strikes next week. Grant Shapps says the RMT union has ignored requests to negotiate a deal to stop the industrial action on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. The union claims rising inflation means its members, who've had a 3-year pay freeze, have now taken a 20% pay cut. The Labour leader has warned the government's levelling up agenda will fail if they don't devolve power outside of Whitehall. The Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Michael Gove, has previously said his plans are essential to address the UK's regional inequalities. But speaking in Coventry, Sir Keir Starmer accused the Tories of hoarding power in the capital, which is directly linked to the cost of living crisis. The new head of the British Army has warned his troops must prepare to fight in Europe as the war continues in Ukraine. General Sir Patrick Sanders wrote to soldiers about the challenges they face. He said it's imperative to build an army that's capable of fighting against Russia. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has said we need to steel ourselves for a long war. And Olympic champion Dame Kelly Holmes has shared her relief at coming out after decades of living in fear around her sexuality. In an interview with the Sunday Mirror, the 52-year-old says she's known since she was 17 when she was in the Women's Royal Army Corps, but she kept it a secret out of fear of repercussions. Now Dame Kelly says she could cry with relief. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, we'll get back to political correction in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. This week marked 50 years since the start of the iconic Watergate scandal in the United States. The saga, beginning with the bugging of Democratic Party officers, is widely regarded as the biggest political scandal in history after the involvement of President Richard Nixon emerged, leading him to become the only president in history to resign from office. Watergate has left a lasting legacy on the world, changing the nature of politics and journalism, and even giving us the famous gate suffix whenever a new political scandal emerges. Well, joining us to talk about the legacy of this remarkable event is the former Republican Congressman for Ohio, Bob McEwen. Bob, thank you for your time this morning. I guess first question, what are your memories of Watergate from when it actually happened?
Well, I think the significance between a parliamentary system and the American system is that in the American system, when you're elected, you just don't resign. And it's only happened once in history, and so it was a traumatic event. Under a parliamentary system, if you attract too much flack, then the honorable thing to do is to step aside for a while until things blow over. So to walk away from the presidency is something that is momentous and hasn't happened before or since.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel it has kind of shaped politics and the nature of political scandals? I mean, we mentioned in the beginning, everything is gate now. Whatever happens, it's something gate following Watergate. But what do you think the lasting legacy has been?
Well, I think the really significant lasting legacy has been the change in the relationship between those in government and the media. And Woodward and Bernstein became heroes because they were able to take down a president. And now the schools are teaching that if you can take somebody down, that never trust anybody in leadership, whether it be a mayor or a sheriff. Whenever they're saying something, you've got to get the real truth. And so the lack of trust and confidence in people who have dedicated their life to public service, I think it is the most damaging thing that we've seen. And it's not just here. It seems to be global.
Mm-hmm. It certainly feels so. I mean, you look at the trust that people have in politicians versus other career groups, and we tend to be right near the very bottom there. Do you think that's concerning in terms of people's engagement in politics, though? People actually turning out and voting or indeed putting themselves forward for office?
Both of those. I think it is very, very damaging. As you know, free governments have to have confidence and trust in each other. And there has to be standards to which they're committed. The reason that oligarchies and dictatorships don't work is that people feel they're not a part of it. They don't trust it, and eventually they always topple and with great destruction to the country and to the system. The free enterprise capitalistic democratic election system, where you're a part of the economy and you're a part of who elects, that has given us the peace and prosperity that we've known, certainly in the English-speaking languages, English-speaking countries, and the example they've been to the world. That lack of faith in people, that if a person goes into government, there must be something about them that we can't trust, that is very, very damaging. I hope that it can be reversed. We'll see, but it's not certainly happening at the present time.
Mm-hmm. No, it certainly doesn't feel that way. And then finally, scandals often do sort of determine the legacy of an individual, be it in office or elsewhere. Do you think that Watergate really is the one thing people think of now when they think of Nixon and kind of disregard the rest of his actual political achievements?
Well, they always say that about a great leader, he only gets one sentence. And Franklin Roosevelt would have been a World War II. And with Nixon, it's going to be Watergate. With Reagan, it's tear down this wall. But the truth is that in our time, I think there's only been two global strategists. The two greatest have been Winston Churchill and Richard Nixon. And Nixon understood the great global competition between Russia, between the Soviet Empire and China, and was able to play that in such a manner that restructured the globe. He was very, very insightful. He was not a very personable, chatty guy, but he and Churchill both at times they were the largest read nonfiction writers in the world. And so he had much to offer. He was very brilliant. Just quickly, the National Security Advisor for Ronald Reagan tried to commit suicide one time. He just died this last week, and so we were reminded that he said when he came to in the hospital, there was Richard Nixon leaning over him, and he said, "I thought my life was over until I learned to give to other people. Now, Bud, get out of this bed and start helping others." And he turned and walked out of the room, and they never saw him again. So Nixon was a very, very skilled and talented man in many areas, and but he won't be remembered for that, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, Bob, thank you for your insights this morning. Bob McEwen there, former Republican congressman for Ohio, to talk about 50 years since Watergate. But now it's time for a very quick update on the week's biggest stories from the world of sport, and I'm delighted to say we're joined here in the studio by sports commentator and broadcaster Aidan McGee. Aidan, a couple of big stories this week, and I think the first one in particular being around Kelly Holmes.
Yeah, exactly, Deanna. She effectively came out overnight. She emerged in the Sunday Mirror this morning at the age of 52. She decided to announce that she is gay. Now, it was a huge surprise to everybody. I know Kelly a little bit. I went to see her about 5 years ago down at a coffee shop that she runs in a place called Southborough in Kent, which I believe was once Winston Churchill's constituency, or one of his constituencies during his time as Prime Minister. And one of the things that she said has driven her to do it is a close brush with COVID. And that was the moment when she realised that after all the breakdowns and the brushes with suicide, that she realised life was too short. And at the age of 52, as I say, she's decided to come out. She's not revealed the identity of her partner, but she chose Pride Month to come out. I mean, don't forget, this is a real calibre individual. But you have to remember she served in the military for 10 years at a time when homosexuality was illegal. She then had a fantastic career as an Olympian. I mean, she was back in 2000. She missed out on the gold or silver medal she was expected to get in Sydney at the 2000 Games. She ended up with a bronze. And then 4 years later, having vowed to come back and win, she not only won the 800, but she also went and won the 1500 as well. So really impressive from her in terms of her career. And I suppose this is the final frontier. As I say, she's there's some distance now between both her military career and her Olympic career. She's kind of out of the public eye to some degree, although you still do see her on telly from time to time, and she's taken the decision to make the announcement overnight in the Sunday Mirror.
Paul, over to you, because you've got a football question.
Well, I've just been, like Aidan, I've been following all of the transfer speculation at the moment. And I know Aidan has got all of these insights and networks and contacts. I want him to reassure me as a Wolves fan that Ruben Neves is not going to be going to Manchester United or Barcelona or Arsenal. I understand that some of these clubs are possibly bidding 50 or 60 million for him. Come on, Aidan, give me some good news. We need him to stay at Molineux.
There is an update of sorts, actually, Paul, because the Manchester United CEO, Richard Arnold, was caught in a difficult position last night. Some video footage emerged online of him talking to supporters down at a pub. Now, he got a tip-off, apparently, that supporters were going to be coming to do a gentle protest outside his gates of his Cheshire home. And so he decided to get ahead of the game and actually arranged to meet them in a local pub. And one of the things he said, now, inevitably, the interview or the chat was, even though it was off the record, it was broadcast or recorded and leaked on social media. And he said there were £200 million to spend on players. He didn't actually mention Frenkie de Jong, but I think Ruben Neves, you can assume, would be in that bracket as well. He's had a fantastic couple of seasons for Wolves, been a mainstay of their team ever since they got promoted back in 2018. But among the other things he said as well, he said he needed a break from the protest because it's undermining the work of the club. They said that £1 billion had been burned in the last few years, especially in the aftermath of Sir Alex Ferguson's retirement in 2013. He also said that although there's £200 million available for transfers, he won't be spending the money himself, which is a bit of a dig at his predecessor, Sir Ed Woodward. Most people could see that maybe he was signing the players and the manager wasn't. Jose Mourinho, for example, always complained that he didn't have enough control or autonomy over transfers, which you would expect as the manager of the team. But he also said that if they're going to update the stadium, they're going to need external investment from somewhere. So that always throws the club into a little bit of jeopardy there, because you're wondering, well, OK, the owners aren't popular, but sometimes it's better the devil you know. It's going to take about £1 billion if Tottenham's anything to go by to rebuild your stadium, because Old Trafford is deemed to be falling into a little bit of a state of disrepair. Hasn't had any major work done on it for about 15 years. So he said there will be external investors. But yeah, it was a revealing insight. But, a difficult situation for the CEO. But when I look back at it now, you take a step back, you look at the videos. He didn't say anything. He used a few swear words, which you might be expected to use down at the pub, but I don't think he's come out of it too badly.
Really well. Aidan, thank you for that very quick sport roundup, and I'm sure we'll see you back again next Sunday. Now, a new report from the Taxpayers Alliance claims that around 24,000 public sector workers are doubling up as trade union representatives at a cost of around £100 million to the taxpayer in union facility time last year. The report has received the backing of Brexit Opportunities Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg and comes ahead of the largest national rail strike since the 1980s. It raises question as to whether the taxpayer should foot the bill for trade union facility time and what the rules should be around public sector moonlighting. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Joe Ventry from the Taxpayers Alliance. Joe, firstly, just tell us, what is trade union facility time?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Deanna. In essence, trade union facility time is the mechanism in which workers in any industry, be it public or private sector, take time from their working day to fulfill union duties. Now, of course, the difference in the public sector, which is what we've looked into, is, of course, that these working hours that these people are paid for are, of course, footed by taxpayers. So that is our principal concern with this paper.
And just give us another feel for the scale of this, because I think, is it about £100 million a year in sort of taxpayer-funded work hours that this is costing?
Yes, that's right. So the most recent year on record, which is 2020-21, the last financial year on record for this, cost nearly £100 million for the whole the bill across the public sector, and that's actually a £23.5 million increase from the year prior. So, I think the real tragedy here, when it comes down to it, is that when we look at the disruption ahead, be it the week ahead or potentially even the summer ahead, a lot of the people who won't be able to get to work or to their medical appointments or whatever it may be are being made essentially to subsidise the bodies that are responsible for the disruption. And, I think a lot of people don't even know that this is a phenomenon. So I think, this really underlines why we are looking to the government to hopefully implement some sensible caps to facility time where taxpayers are concerned.
So I'm going to throw to our in-house trade union expert, Paul Embry. Paul, why is this sort of facility time allowed? And do you think it's right that the taxpayers are funding this?
Well, let's be clear, Deanna. The vast majority of union reps up and down this country are volunteers. They step up to the plate in their workplaces to represent people. For example, when people are called to disciplinary hearings, when people have got grievances, if there are health and safety issues to be raised, if there are joint negotiations on pay and things like that. The idea that the vast majority of union reps are fat cats who are squandering taxpayers' money is grotesque. And actually, the evidence shows that having union reps in the workplace and having that direct link with management to be able to speak on behalf of workers with a collective voice actually makes the workplace better and happier and more productive, which, by the way, is exactly why some of the biggest private sector employers allow facility time, the likes of Morrison's and Asda's and Land Rover and companies like that. So, I mean, I don't know what Joe and the Taxpayers Alliance are arguing. They seem to be suggesting when someone performs the service of representing someone in a disciplinary case, for example, that they shouldn't be paid for it. I mean, that seems to me to be appalling. Any civilized society and any modern workplace should take account of the fact that people deserve to be represented and should allow volunteers to do that representation. And the vast majority of them do a grand job.
But Paul, I guess the point is that most volunteers who, volunteer for charities or whatever have to do it outside of their working hours and don't get paid for that volunteer time. How do you respond to that?
Well, simply, Deanna, if someone's called to a disciplinary interview at 2:00 in the afternoon in front of a manager, then if the rep is also at work at that time, he or she will go along at that time. If you're having joint negotiations on pay, invariably those negotiations will be called during work time. They're not going to be called at 7:00 when everyone's in the pub in the evening. So simply to present this as union fat cats wasting public money, I think is a gross distortion. As I said, these are volunteers. These are people who do it as a service, and they are performing not internal union activities, but trade union duties that are enshrined in law. We say that people are entitled to be represented in discipline and grievance and things like that. Well, if they're entitled to be represented, don't attack the people who step up to represent them. That's part of the civilised workplace.
Joe, how would you respond to Paul's comments?
Well, to be clear on that, we're not knocking volunteers. We're simply shining a light on the people who are paid by taxpayers to fulfil their duties, whether that's in the healthcare service or whether in transport bodies, who are then, of course, undertaking union roles. And, we're not saying for a moment, we're not saying let's abolish this practice whatsoever. What we're calling on is a sensible cap. So we're calling on for maximum working hours to be reduced to 50%. As you know, of course, there are some people who spend 100% of their working hours fulfilling union duties whilst being paid for by the taxpayer for their original role, and that simply isn't on. So I think what we're calling for here is sensible reforms. This isn't about bashing supposed fat cats or anything like that. We're just asking for the unions to be quite reasonable in this, I think.
Paul, is that fair?
No, I was a trade union rep for the Fire Brigades Union, and I was representing 6,000 people. It wasn't unreasonable at all that when I was representing 6,000 firefighters, the London Fire Brigade management had me as a contact with all of the workload involved in representing 6,000 people, that I had release time made available to me so that I could go to the London Fire Brigade headquarters and negotiate on behalf of 6,000 members. And frankly, that works for the employer as well, because you're dealing with someone consistently, the same face, someone who's available at all times. If we go the way the Taxpayers Alliance want us to go, trust me, there will be far more industrial disputes, there will be far more dismissals, there will be less productive and less happier workplaces, because they want to drive volunteers out of the workplace so that they can get their way. That's not going to solve problems at all.
Well, very interesting discussion there, and I'm sure we'll have more on this if government does respond more formally to that report. But Joe Ventry there joining us from the Taxpayers Alliance. Joe, thank you for your time. And as always, loads of you have been getting in contact with us today. We'll read out some more of your views. Paul on the Tom Hanks story says, if you follow this logic through, only straight men can play straight men, and that means Hollywood's going to be in real trouble. We've got Steve here on Scottish independence. I'm totally sick of the whole debate over Scottish independence. It's led to the hating of the English to become a national pastime north of the border. They take our English money and spit in our face. Let's have a UK-wide referendum to kick the Scots out of the Union. Well, as a committed unionist, I don't agree with that final sentiment, but I do agree with the point of a UK-wide referendum if there is to be one. Arlene, have you got some views for us?
Yeah, everybody's getting very excited about this whole issue of only gay men should play gay people in films. And Tony says, the world's going mad. I agree with that. Shall we start releasing serial killers out of prison to play serial killer roles? Should real soldiers play soldiers in films? The word actor says it all. If you can act a part, whatever it is, just do it. And people, please get a grip. This is so depressing. I agree with Tony. I have to say.
And Paul, what views have you got for us there?
Yeah, and there's a similar theme. Arnold says, I believe a fictional character, it shouldn't be a hard rule, but with historical characters like Anne Boleyn, a black actress should never be cast as it gives a false sense of history. For fictional characters, we need more Ripley's from Alien, where they wrote a general asexual character and the best person for the job walks in, auditions and gets it.
I think that's a really good suggestion there from Arnold. And then on this as well, we've got Peter who says, therefore, only a royal should take on the acting role of a royal. Please, please, not Harry or Meghan, says Peter. And I think we've got a few more on Boris going to Ukraine, haven't we, Arlene?
Yeah, so Michael says 100% Boris should have gone to the Ukraine. He is showing what leadership is. What happened to the Union flag behind Starmer? Didn't take long for that novelty to wear off. Obviously, there's no Union flag behind Starmer today while he's making that speech.
And Paul, one final view from you.
Yeah, Alan says all those who voted against the Prime Minister recently were either pushing their own agenda, I don't know if he's having a little dig at you there, Deanna, I couldn't possibly comment, or virtue signalling to their voters. I find them all more hypocritical than usual.
Well, we're running out of time on the show for me to really bounce back at Alan today, but I'd say it's probably not the case. Alan, stick with us. We'll have lots more discussions, I'm sure, on this point moving forward. But I think it's been a great show today. We have covered so much ground, some really meaty topics, but mainly thank you to you guys for getting involved and sharing your thoughts and analysis. So you've been watching and listening to The Political Correction. Join us next Sunday at 10 a.m. for 2 hours of more discussion, debate and analysis of the week's biggest political stories. But up next, it is the wonderful Alastair Stewart, so don't you go anywhere.
Looking ahead to the weather today, and it's dry for many, but there will be some showers around, especially in the south.
So there we go. The southwest of England this lunchtime will be largely dry with some bright spells. There will be a keen breeze with just a chance of the odd shower.
The shower risk will be greater across southeast England, especially for Kent and Sussex. Away from the showers, there'll be some glimmers of sunshine.
And lunchtime across Wales will be largely dry with a mix of cloud and sunshine. Temperatures will be climbing towards the high teens.
For the Midlands, more in the way of cloud, especially in the north, with perhaps the odd spot of rain. Some sunshine will break through the cloud, though, at times.
Northern England, however, will see a better chance of seeing sunnier skies this lunchtime, with most places dry. And in the sunshine, it will feel fairly pleasant, with temperatures in the high teens.
Southern Scotland will be dry as we move into this afternoon, although it's going to be rather cloudy. Northern Scotland, rather blustery, with some frequent showers.
And then early afternoon across Northern Ireland, however, will be dry with plenty of sunny spells. The northerly breeze will make it feel fresh, especially near the coast, with temperatures in the mid-teens.
So some rain may move into the southwest during the rest of today. Otherwise, it's going to be dry, and that's your weather for Sunday.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.